just to...
Sorry.
Thank you. Well remembered.
Yeah.
So yeah, welcome to this DXBPE PE Active collaboration with Jackie. Jackie, thank you for being here and allowing this to happen. It's certainly something I think would be very, very valuable to us as teachers, and the series as well that we're looking to do. For those attending, if you have a question, we want it to be quite collaborative and conversational. Jackie will, hi Dan. Jackie will just go with the flow. We're fine to interrupt. You can click the reaction at the bottom of your screen and raise a hand if you want to raise a hand to ask a question. You can also type it in the chat as well if you'd rather not interrupt. That's absolutely fine, and then we'll come to it, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. It is being recorded, so keep that in mind, especially if you've got your cameras on or if you're going to say anything. So Sophie, no picking your nose, please. And and the last request, please, if you just press the little 3 dots in the top right corner of your camera, and then you can click rename at the bottom. We just want you to put the name of your school after your name, please. So I've got mine there, Ed Moseley Dubai College. If you could do the same for yours, and that will help Jackie know where we're coming from, and she's got a little idea as well about exam boards that we're teaching. Okay, so otherwise, I think that's most of the housekeeping. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just let them do the rename. If you can't, guys, I've got the chat open, so happy for you to pop it in the chat and I can rename on your behalf. I know if someone's on an iPad, it might not be as easy. But yeah, the 3 dots at the top right of your thumbnail should allow you to rename. Thanks, Sophie. Oh, I've just nearly removed you. That would be interesting. Hopefully that's your renamed. Okay, hi Ellie. I can do that one my end as well if you guys just don't mind while I do it. I'm really bad at saying that. Is it Jamar? How do I say it, Ed? Come off mute and tell me so I don't get it wrong.
Jamira.
Jamira. Okay, Jamira. I must remember that. Just getting rid of my kids and I'll get my camera on. Oh, that'd be good. We've all got cameras in. Okay, so you teach the Edexcel. What for A-level, Dan? Daniel, Dan, which is it? Do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, it's Dan.
Hi, Dan.
We don't teach A-level at the moment, but we will be delivering it next year.
I see. Okay.
So it'll probably be the Edexcel.
Oh, okay. So am I on a bit of a trying to persuade you to do AQA at this point?
Maybe, yeah. Could be persuaded.
Okay, I will be really honest with you. My expertise is AQA. I don't know much about, although I do work for Pearson, I work on the BTEC side of things. So I don't know much about the A-level. But I suppose in you just hearing this, you can make an informed decision about which way you want to go. With my AQA hat on, I still am shocked at how many schools are doing one spec for GCSE and one for A-level. So I do get that if you're doing Edexcel for GCSE, there is that transition, that fluidity into A-level, and it's the same for AQA as well. Okay, right. Oh.
Sorry.
No,
that's exactly at the moment. We're Edexcel GCSE, so we're thinking we'll stay the same, but I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I'll always promote AQA, but I get that. I think for the exam purposes in particular, which I know we're doing in the next couple of sessions, there's so much transition from the command words and how they answer the questions. I guess it's the same for Edexcel as well. Okay, so thanks I know this has been recorded as well, so those who are listening it back on the recording, thanks for having me. Thanks massively to Ed for setting this up. We've tried to go through, within the sessions, we've tried to pick things that we think are relevant and topical, and we'll support you with that AQA A-level specification. So this first session is solely looking at the coursework. Now, I recognise these school names. I know that myself and Jason did something years back, pre-COVID for certain, with you guys, but I think we've very much focused on the practical side of things. We didn't do much on the coursework, and there may have been a change in staff since then anyway. But if that's not the case, I don't recognise names, but if you were with myself and Jason, some of the messages you hear now you may have heard then, but I do know we spent a lot more on the practical than we did on the coursework. So I'm going to share my screen. All this documentation I will send on to Ed as well, so you guys can have it. I just didn't want to overwhelm in the first instance. So we're looking massively at that analysis and evaluation piece of work. Now, I have got things that I want to go through, and there are things that I've been working with schools back in the UK, whether it's with teachers or with students, but I also want to make sure it's relevant to you guys. Now, I know we've heard from Dan that he's not yet doing it, so kind of to Ed, to Sophie, to Ellie, is there any questions that you want to ask specifically about the coursework? If we pop it in the chat now or come off mute, I can make sure I adjust accordingly, so I am meeting your guys' needs.
From me, I'm new to marking this, so it's basically just kind of an overview of what it looks like. I'm brand new to it, so that's where I'm at.
Okay. Do you have any of the marked examples of tolls?
The examples that I have are the ones that have been given to me by staff from my school, where they've been, they've got high marks, but I haven't got it off of that specific place now. Okay.
I only say that because on there is a rugby league example, so I appreciate that might not be the sport, but it got 42 out of 45. So it's on there as a high level one, but it's also on there in terms of the things you need to do with regards to marking.
So do you say it's on TOLL? TOLL?
TOLLs, so teacher online standardization. You're with Ed, aren't you?
Yeah.
Ed, you've got an EAQA login?
Yeah.
So currently, I mean, what it might be best I'll do post this, if that's easier, is I'll just send you a few instructions of how to get there.
Yes, please.
Okay. When you get on there, once you've done it, it's quite self-explanatory navigating through it, but you're looking for an icon that's called View Assessment Criteria. And there were 4 examples on there, but I'm kind of directing you to the rugby league one. One, because it's a high level one, but 2, you can it shows how it's been marked as well, which will really help you, Sophie, with the marking.
Thank you.
So attached to it are the best fit marking grids, which obviously everyone uses when they mark it, but you'll also see in it how it's been annotated to acknowledge the best fit marking grid. So we often say about making sure that you echo the language that's in the grid. So you don't want to be annotating too much, because I appreciate that's a mammoth task, but where you might have awarded level 5, a lot will just say level 5, and then they'll give a small annotation as to why, but they use the language from the best fit marking grid. And that's definitely been used on that example. So I'll make a note to myself to send Ed that. Were there any other questions, Sophie?
No, not at the moment.
I think for me, Jackie, I've got one. So yeah, similar to Sophie, really. I marked A level for 2 or 3 years at the start of my career, and then I've had like a big sort of chunk of time off doing it. And at that time, I had a good person supporting me with that marking as well.
Okay.
So now it's like, right, what key things do I need to be doing in terms of marking and feedback and supporting the students? We've got good examples, and that rugby league one will be a good example, but sort of what are the practical things that I need to be doing to support these students to get the best possible marks, really.
Okay. Without sounding patronizing, have you got the best fit marking grids?
I haven't started marking anything just yet, so I've been waiting for this session, so yeah,
okay.
haven't looked at the grids yet.
Okay. I think as part of my presentation, I'll just click on it now. I'm going over a little bit, but that's okay, because I want to make this, hang on, let me just find it. So this is what it looks like for the evaluation bit.
Yeah.
There's one of these that exists for the analysis, and there's one that exists for the evaluation. I'm going to go through this in a bit when I talk about the evaluation, but just so you both know, obviously your students are doing area of assessment 2 and area of assessment 3. So they're essentially, you're using this twice I see lots of different versions, but probably the one that I would best recommend is you have 2 different colours, one for area assessment 2, one for area assessment 3. So when you're marking area assessment 2, you acknowledge where they fit in these 5 columns, sorry. Then you do the same for area assessment 3 in a slightly different colour. And then from that, you get a line of best fit in terms of a total of out of 25.
Okay.
With regards to using with your students, I know this is quite full on in terms of words, but most of the centres I work with tend to use these with the students all the time. Because then it's echoing the language as well. On the back of the analysis one is this document here, which is probably the better one to use with your students, because it gives them clear things that they need to be doing in both sections, all of which I'm going to go through now. Yes, it'll be a bit more of a summary, but a lot of what you hear from me is echoed in what's been said here. I know that a lot of students use this as a checklist for their work. Better still, actually, oh, Ed's still off. Do you have a checklist that you use with your students?
But literally, we are starting from scratch, Jackie. I mean, and there are other people in the department who will be doing this. Me and Sophie coming in, we haven't started marking yet. So, like I say, assume from scratch here. We haven't done checklists yet. With the students have submitted one piece of work to us, their sort of first draft that they did over the summer,
right?
And that's where we're at the moment for us.
Okay, so what the reason I asked you that is obviously I've shown you that document that works horizontally that's on the back of the best fit marking grids. What you can see on the screen at the minute is this was a school I worked with back in the UK, and they changed it slightly to make it a bit more student friendly. I'm sharing it now, but they're willing for me to share it to you guys as well. And having worked with students using this, the feedback I'm getting is they quite like it, because it's very much a yes no in terms of have you done that, and that hopefully will help you guys when you're marking. So they used that previous document I was just showing you to build this along with the specification, but tried to take out all the bump. So there's some really clear elements of this that I will go through now, but that again, you saying, I want to know how best to use that with my students. I think this is a really useful document.
That looks brilliant.
Yeah.
Helpful, yeah.
It's exactly what my reaction was when the school and I were discussing it. And I know students like it as well.
Yeah.
So that will be coming your way as well. I'll go back to the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got loads of things open, so just got to make sure I go back to the right document. Okay.
Also got Ellie. Have you got any particular questions or things you'd like to know from today?
No, I mean, I haven't, like Dan was saying, I haven't taught A-level for a long time. The last thing I did was IB when I was in Singapore, and then before that was sort of BTECs, really, level 3s. So I did examine for OCR. Oh my God, it feels like a whole nother lifetime ago. So I know that like the assessment stuff has changed dramatically. Greg at my place at Jamira College, he's fantastic. He's in charge of all the A-level stuff. It's been really useful and really helpful. And I know has a lot of material and stuff, but it's just, it's nice to hear it from scratch, like from a fresh set of ears, from an expert as well. So I'm just going to suck it all up today.
That's fine. That's good for me to hear. I recognise the name Greg. I think Greg has probably come to a couple of my trainings.
Yeah, he has. Yeah, he's very. You come very highly recommended by him, which is great.
No pressure. No, okay, cool. All right. So, because there's only a few of us on here, then come off mute and stop me at any point. But I'm also conscious that an hour does get eaten up quite quickly. And my intention is, I suppose, because a few of you are hearing it for the first time, is I will talk very much about structure, and then I can feed in bits about marking as I go through it. I'm just going to go back a bit, sorry, because I changed the way I went. When I've done this with teachers in particular, I've left this slide in. I asked kind of 4 really kind of thought-provoking questions. So this is not me asking you to answer them, it's just for you to consider. And the reason I use them is, I know we can only go back to 2019, but the lead moderator report, these were kind of the four development areas that were really kind of needed to be addressed. And then obviously COVID came and we didn't have an exam series. So using the level of response grids, which I've just gone through. The other is based on structure. So part of the analysis work is that students have to include an elite performer, or they have to include the correct technical model. What a lot were doing in 2019 and prior to that is they were making that very standalone. So what you're going to hear from me now is kind of the requirements and making sure that's integrated. And it wouldn't surprise me if those of you that are saying you've got examples from previous years, I would be shocked to hear if you didn't tell me that maybe that standalone approach had been used, because it was an approach that was used in the old spec, and it kind of filtered through to this spec when it's not, that's not the way to do it. So I will talk about that in terms of that analysis. I think we've got new people on, so I'm going to have to do both of these. So it's knowing what is meant by breadth and depth. If I can share with you those kind of schools in the UK, I know most are going down the depth route, and I will probably then explain to you why as we move through the presentation. And finally, it's about using the specification. When I go and do this with students now, I ask the teachers to make sure they've got their sport bit of their specification available to them, and they've also got the theory spec, either whether that's on a device or as a paper base, because that is quite significant, certainly when we get to the evaluation section. So they were kind of the kind of thought-provoking questions for you guys, but also those listening on the recording, and you'll see why as I go through. Now, it feels weird starting with the non-negotiables, but one of the things I've done back here is when I've done full day courses or half day courses, there was one teacher, particularly one day at the end of the session, and he was like, right, Jackie, I'm getting this now, but could we have a kind of almost a list of this has got to be involved. This has to be there in the analysis and then in the evaluation. I guess that probably now is superseded by that checklist that I shared with you, but I've still included it in this presentation because the two align. So for the analysis, that for the new guys, this is the mark out of 20. So it's out of 45 in total, but they get a mark out of 20 for their analysis. And the big thing to say for your students is this is their sport knowledge. There's no theory in this at all. This is just, they're very much the opportunity to show what they know about their particular sport. Now, here comes the spec straight away. So often if I'm doing this with students and they're picking up on what their weakness is going to be, they're looking at area of assessment 2 and area of assessment 3, and they're trying to pick a weakness. And I often say to them, that is your start of your coursework. You take that weakness direct from the specification. Now you'll notice there I've said weakness, and that's because I'm a real fan of depth. But if through as a centre you are, maybe your policy is to do breadth, then that would be state the weaknesses. So you would do a number from the specification. Either way, they've got to be direct. We still see students making the weaknesses up. And even though that might exist in their sport, we recommend that it comes direct from the specification.
Jackie,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. With the breadth versus depth, is one better for the other for, like, you know, getting top marks? Because I imagine depth with one weakness they'll be able to show greater. Oh, sorry, have I? No. This is how it needs to be. It's good. We are seeing, so I'm going to answer that. I know I'm being recorded, but I'm going to answer that really honestly. We are seeing that students struggle with breadth and they're able to access better marks with depth. All right. And for the newbies, I've tried to show this on this slide the best I can. So if they go breadth, I've got basketball as an example. It has to be from area of assessment 2, which for a games player is defense. That they pick a number of weaknesses. So essentially a number of skills, defensive skills, and you can see there's a list of those there. Now within them, they've got to analyze each weakness consistently, and I've highlighted consistently because I think that answers your question, Ed.
that they struggle to do that. So they may do it brilliantly on weakness 1, and then by weakness 2 and weakness 3, they're struggling. And then if you look at the language on the best fit marking grid, that pulls them down a few levels.
Okay.
When they're doing that analysis, they are basically saying what happened, the impact that had on a performance, and how that compares to the elite or the correct technical model. And again, they lose that consistency because that then starts to feel a lot. Whereas with depth, what starts to happen then is they just pick one weakness. So you can see here how that's changed from a number of skills to just focusing on defensive rebound. That's direct from the spec. Now, what they've then got to do for depth is maybe pick out a number of errors within that weakness. So it's really common. And on that checklist that I showed that you liked, they've actually used the language preparation, execution, and recovery. And I know that's really common, those 3. But for some skills, that doesn't always work. So I've given an example here that for defensive rebounding, they might use body position, position on score, court, elevation, and timing. They choose those subheadings. But if they're going for the depth approach, they want to be thinking, I think, at least 3 for area assessment 2. Now, that means they still need that consistency across all 3, but they're much more focused on that one weakness. And I think in answer to your question, that means that they stay focused and they don't lose it by then having to do that again on another weakness, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
All we do say on here, though, is if they're doing, say they're going to go prep, execution, recovery, because I know that's really common, each of those has to be directly compared to the technical model. And whenever they're talking about it, they're always, it's almost like AO3 in the exam, they're almost thinking of why, what impact did that have? I use the terminology that's on the back of that best fit marking grid about imagine the moderator can visualize that performance. So visualize what went wrong. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I think I'm going to bite my lip a lot more now because you look like you've got everything perfectly lined out. So.
No, but I like it when that happens because then it means I'm not just talking. So I'm going back to my non-negotiables. And that might help me actually, because one of the non-negotiables as we move down was breadth or depth, choose early. So I can kind of just scan over them now. Right. A lot of students fall into the habit of just talking about their sport. And so one of our non-negotiables here is it actually has to be a specific performance within that sport. I've got an example here that, again, a centre was willing for me to share with you. Let me just minimize so I can get it on the screen. That I might just share with you at this point. Hang on, sorry. So hopefully you can see now that Word document. Give me a thumbs up, Ed. Can you see that? Yeah, so we've got a rugby union guy now. You can see here's his weakness direct from the specification. The reason I'm sharing with you now is one of the non-negotiables I try to recommend is you choose that specific performance and then you do an introduction on it, but that introduction needs to be really concise because it's not really something that you mark, but it sets the scene. Okay, it sets the scene about that performance that they're going to go on and analyze, and within that, how that weakness kind of unfolded. So you can, and this is a really good example in that you can see that he gave a little bit of an introduction about that performance, who he was playing, that particular game. I've even highlighted it because I've done similar feedback to students just recently. So I've highlighted that he's actually pinpointed a moment in the game when that weakness happened. And that's really good as well. That keeps them really on track as they're following that kind of depth approach. So rather than talking generically about rooking in rugby union, he's actually talking about that body position at this particular moment in the game. Whilst I'm kind of sharing that with you, this paragraph here almost just does set the scene, just talks about how that weakness started to unfold. I've put a green 12 here, and with students, I often ask them to guess what that means. I won't put that to you guys, but all I did is I numbered how many times I used I. And it sometimes feels a bit patronizing, but to students, they can fall into some default errors in terms of just talking about the player or speaking generically. So it's my way of saying another non-negotiable is you've got to use the right tense, and it's all on you. So the more you use I, the better that will be. And even in this first introduction, this particular student had done that 12 times in that paragraph. So yeah, that I think that's really good practice. Whilst we're on this one, it might be worth saying, you can see here that he's talked about breakdown and jackal. So on the best fit marking, it talks about using correct language or technical language, and that's the sport technical language. So to students, I often say the moderator knows nothing about that sport. So in this instance, imagine that I know nothing about rugby. So this particular student has decided to qualify terminology by using like a little reference method. So you can see at the bottom, it then qualifies what those two things are. I've seen it in loads of different ways. Some just put it in brackets afterwards. Some might use the comment section on Word or on Google Docs, depending on what they're using. But again, it's saying to your students, right, qualify any kind of sport technical language you use, because that is an expectation and part of the marking. So that's what it means by choose specific performance, back on the PowerPoint, and then introduce the performance. But we don't want it to be a bibliography about them. It just needs to be half a page max in terms of what that performance looked like and how that scenario unfolded to show that weakness. Okay, they probably now make sense because I've just gone through them. So thanks to Ed for asking that. You can see I've highlighted yellow. I tend to find now it's depth that I am working with mainly, but I know you are given the choice. And it's just then reminding that if they're doing depth, they've got to use a subheading. Prep, execution, recovery, for example. What a lot of students find is when they get to do area of assessment 3, so that is the tactical, the strategies, prep, execution, recovery doesn't always work because of the nature of the tactics and the strategies that come within the specification. So we often have discussions around it could be vision, decision-making, output. I think what I'm suggesting here is you put that to the learners. They've got to think about the subheadings they're going to use to show depth, if that's the approach you're choosing. Within that, I think quite a few forget to say what the weakness did. All right, so part of the checklist that I shared with you is, well, how did that cause the performance to deteriorate? So again, imagine that the marker knows nothing and they should almost visualize what went wrong. In the checklist that exists in the best fit marking grid, it actually uses the word co-actors. So it's saying to your students, right, what happened to, if it is a team game, what impact did it have on your own team? What was happening to the competitive co-actors? You know, did they then get possession of the ball? What happened as a result of that? So that impact needs to be involved in all of it, in the prep paragraph, the execution paragraph, and the recovery paragraph. Now, this is what I think I mentioned this at the beginning. So this is where some students leave the elite performer. They do all that great work, and then at the bottom somewhere they'll say, and so does it this way. All right, and that's standalone. So one of our non-negotiables is within each of those prep, execution, and recovery, we integrate a comparison to either an elite or the correct technical model. Now, I think most students tend to go for an elite because that gives them, it's probably a little bit better for engagement, but it could be just the correct technical model. It could be themselves when they've done it well. But the key point I'm saying in with regards to a non-negotiable is it has to be integrated. So, you know, it could be, my weakness was this is what happened as a result. The performance deteriorated. However, when so-and-so does it, this is how it looks. Okay, so it's really integrating those comparisons to help them explain the weakness. I've put here color font because I know what a lot of centres are doing is actually changing the color of the font at that point. So it jumps out to an assessor that the comparisons are there for a start, but they're integrated and they're direct. I know some schools use italics. Go on, Ed.
Thank you. Oh, well spotted. I went on mute. So yeah, changing the color font, that you don't get no negative there in terms of presentation or formalities.
No.
Okay.
No.
And
No.
and then you do that integration at the end of preparation, execution, recovery, rather than, like you say, two separate. So you wouldn't analyze an elite performer, preparation, execution, recovery on their own.
Nope.
And say, I've done the comparison below, and then
Yeah.
do that. It has to be integrated, yeah.
100%. And we don't quite need the bibliography on the elite either. Ideally, we want, the best practice is to use the elite in that similar moment. So I know for our rugby union guy that I just showed you, I'm trying to think who was picked. I'm just scrolling down. He's got an Ireland player, David Pocock, I think, and he's got them at that moment doing a similar ruck in a game against, I can't remember who it was, but he's not done different color font. He's actually done italics, so his centre I know are using italics. Just to finish off this, and I then can go back to that example to show you that. Theory is only needed if it's relevant to the weakness. So if you've switched off, hopefully you haven't, but maybe anyone listens to the recording, you might have done. This is the bit where I'd probably be saying to you, switch back on. I know it's so common that I'm seeing even now people using movement analysis in this part. So talking about, if we're talking about our guy whose body position when rucking, they'll be talking about what's happening at the knee and flexion at the knee and what's going on in the hip, which plane and axis has been used, which lever system. And I think that's a kind of a misinterpretation of the use of technical language. The technical language is the sport language. There doesn't need to be any movement analysis. There's no theory in this section unless it is relevant. So for example, for our rucker, if he had not enough flexion at the knee, then it would make sense to talk about flexion and the muscles that are causing flexion. I suspect you might see examples, because I know they exist in the global world on the internet, where it does do that, and it's a kind of a big no-no. From a marking perspective, though, if a learner's included it, you don't negatively mark, you don't discredit, you just ignore. And that's what a moderator would do. They would just ignore it, and then part of their feedback would be, this theory is not relevant. In an analysis, there should be no theory. Likewise for the images, they're great if you can include them, but they're only needed if they support the analysis. So we often see just random images stuck in for no reason. And I would say if they're going to use images, they need to support what they're saying. So for our rugby guys back here, they are able to find elite performers doing that skill. It's not always that easy for other performers or other sports, but yet please include them, particularly if they've got screenshots of themselves to support. Right, in the first person, which I think I just explained when we showed our introduction, and it needs to suggest it has happened. Right, they start to use the wrong tense, learners. This could have been, this should have. And you're like, well, no, actually you're analysing a performance that should have happened. We never check if it has, but it needs to read as though it has. So that was the non-negotiables for the analysis. What I might flick to is our rugby guy again. Where are you? So hopefully you can see the Word document now. So he's straight in now to his analysis. He used eyes look here as his first subheading, so he didn't do the prep, execution, recovery route. So that was my way of just saying, in terms of my feedback, it'd be good if you have your first subheading here. I don't expect you to read it all because we haven't got the time, but I'm hoping that what will jump out to you is that comparison is integrated. I've highlighted it yellow, but he had it as italics because the centre were doing that. And what we find within this, it's nice and concise. So there isn't anything it's saying anywhere that we've got to do loads, but he is talking about what his eyes were doing at that moment when he was rucking. And I've kind of put in purple font just some of those connectives that he used. I go on about the connectives when I talk about exam technique in AO3, but it just shows that he's saying what the weakness, how it unfolded, how it made the performance deteriorate, what it led to. And you can see he's done something similar by putting in some images of his elite. And then I think his next subheading was going to be his head. So they can choose the subheadings if they're doing depth. It doesn't always have to be prep, execution, recovery, even though I know that's probably the most popular. I've got non-negotiables for evaluation, but what I might do is just come back to those. So you can see here, I'm already mirroring some of the languages, sorry, on here, how it deteriorates as a result of the weakness, not a general discussion. So in answer to Ed's question about feedback, I suspect that's the kind of things you could be giving learners, because that's process orientated, not content. So you're not telling them what to write, but you're actually saying, look, I don't know how that performance deteriorated. I need you to tell me more. Remember, as moderators, we don't see the final bit of feedback. So what you do with your learners in your school, we never know, but the guidelines are that it should be process orientated and not content. Markers should be able to visualize the context. So that's often feedback I give a lot to learners. I want to know what went wrong. I can't quite see it. Makes reference to co-actors. So often I might say, well, what was happening with your team at this point, or your competitor? Or, if you're doing, I'm trying to think of a different sport, like if you're doing dance, what was going on with the group at that point, or what interactions were you getting from the audience? So we really want to try and include the others around them. And it supporting what I'm saying, so I'm not lying, theory content is not credited. Anatomical language is used where relevant. So there's no expectation that these guys have got to do a movement analysis on every technical weakness. For the guys that are new to AQA, I know I keep kind of probably speaking about this as if you know it, but essentially this is how the structure runs. The students, if they are doing depth, the students pick an area assessment 2 weakness, and then they do the analysis like I've just explained. Most centres then get them to replicate that for an area of assessment weakness, area of assessment 3, sorry, which is the tactics and strategies. Because that they've got a good scaffold, then they've got a good model. But essentially that's almost part 2. If we work horizontally, you've got part 1 here first, which is the area of assessment 2 on that top line. And then you've got part 2, which is area assessment 3. But most tend to get the analysis done first, because when you get to the evaluation, it's worth more, it's out of 25. But this is where the theory comes in. This is where your specification becomes your best friend. And for a lot of centres, they kind of wait a bit until they've done more teaching in the classroom before they do this. I'm sharing this diagram with you though, because within the evaluation, it almost gets separated into a further 2 parts. You can see here we've got cause and corrective measure. So I'm going to go on and talk a bit more about that. But with the cause, I'm just going to point out what these arrows mean. So when they talk about the cause, the theory, they have to keep linking it back to the weakness. All right, that's what the orange arrow talks about. When they then bring in a corrective measure, or some element that's going to address that, at that point they are then talking about how that will address the cause. What a lot of students do, because they've done such great work on this analysis, they bypass that and they keep talking about the weakness. And from a marking perspective, I imagine that'd be something that you guys have to look out for. So say, for example, we've got our rooking guy. He might have picked a cause, he may have used an arousal theory, for example, and may have then explained how that is causing him to get in that inaccurate body position. When he gets to this bit, he might talk about cognitive stress management techniques, because they are the things that can address the arousal. At that point, he's not talking about rooking anymore. He's talking about how the corrective measure will address the cause. So that's that green arrow, a different color, is trying to represent that. It's really important that the corrective measure addresses the cause. Ed?
Becky.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I do like a good question.
No, so do I.
You mentioned before about, like we're on the analysis now. We're trying to get through more theory, like you said, before we do the evaluation. Do you have, for the students you teach or taught, have a nice little timeline of, you're trying to get the analysis done before Christmas, and then, you're looking at evaluation by February? What do you have any experience or recommendations with that?
I see it in so many different ways. I get asked that question a lot, and I don't know if I always have a go-to. Probably the most common is the one that you've just said. So maybe starting the analysis at the end of year 12.
Yeah.
Pick it up again in like autumn term of year 13. So aiming for like before Christmas to have those kind of pieces done.
Yeah.
Giving it a bit of a rest, so to give them time to get that, and then like you say, picking it up again maybe at the end of January for the evaluation, to get that done, ready for moderation, whenever that might be.
Okay, thank you.
It really depends on the scheme of learning, because a lot of I've got most done by Christmas, so I do see it in slightly different ways, but that's probably the most common one. Okay, where am I? Let's back to the PowerPoint. So we've gone through this already, so I'll just skip that quickly, so I've got my animations on. I'm probably going to go over this bit quickly because I know you're going to get a copy of this. And this is just a very similar paragraph to what we saw with our rugby union guy. It was taken from a piece of work in 2018. And it's just the comment here. There's almost like a commentary here to what's been shown in this and why it's good analysis. So I think this was his preparation paragraph, this particular student. It's football. I know a lot of students do football, hence me including it in this. A lot of what's written on the left, I think I've already echoed in looking at our rugby union. So use of tense, that clear technical error, talked about what happened, how it unfolded, allows the marker to visualize it, even using a connective like a further consequence. No idea why he did John Terry. That's very dated, but he did, and it's in there. And I think it's because he was doing about defensive heading, but it's integrated. And you can see he's actually picked a moment in a game against Arsenal where John Terry did do that same skill, but did it well. But I've gone over that quite quickly because obviously you guys can have access to this as well. Okay, for evaluation, I know I showed you this right at the start because this is our best fit marking approach. I need to kind of point out some clear things that you're looking for in terms of an assessor. There is no breadth at this point. So when it gets to evaluation, it has to be depth. And that goes back to Ed's first question in terms of what do I see mostly? I think because evaluation is depth, a lot of centres now have gone for depth in the analysis. So all the students are used to hearing is the word depth. So what they would do is they have to go through the theory, the spec, and they have to pick on something that they're going to talk about, the cause. And what they're being marked on is the depth of knowledge that they show. So for a lot of them, that will be using their notes, using their textbooks, using their resources, and including all the knowledge on that particular cause. That's exactly the same when it comes to the corrective measure. So again, they are marked on the depth of knowledge that they give. So for you as markers, if you want it to be in level 5, essentially you should be reading it and thinking, right, they can't tell me any more about this particular theory if they've well and truly covered it. And you'll see that in the rugby league example, where a lot of learners then becomes a bit of a challenge for them, but also you when you're marking, is if you look at that middle column, this is where my coloured arrows come in. The cause are directly linked back to the weaknesses. So to be in this top box, you need to have read through that learner's work and think, right, they've told me loads about the cause, and I really feel that they're always linking back to that, the defensive header or the body position when rucking. They're always accounting for why that led to that weakness in that moment. And it is very generic. Sorry, it is very subjective. So you've got here, are usually developed indirectly, sometimes developed, occasionally developed. And I know that's not easy to qualify, but I do think looking at that example or those examples on tolls will definitely allow that to come out. Go ahead.
Yeah, the depth of knowledge thing. So you mentioned arousal theory, inverted U, etc. Do they have to just stay on that lines of the spec, or can they link that to other areas of the spec to show further depth of knowledge? Because if it's related, or do you need to keep them on track and say, no, you just stick to section whatever of the spec and talk about that? Yeah,
great question. You need to keep them on track, because it never needs to read like they've gone into another theory, because the assessor might then think, this is breadth and it should be depth.
Right. Okay.
However, the arousal one is a really good example, because you'd like to think learners are going to use terminology like self-efficacy, for example, self-confidence. So I often say to students, no, that's just correct use of terminology. You're still talking about arousal, but you're using. So I think hopefully that answers your question, that don't go into another theory, but if that particular thing is that terminology you should be using, then, because that obviously fits into this last column in terms of level of technical language.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the arousal one is probably the best one, because they might start talking about confidence and self-efficacy and motivation. We want them to use that terminology. So yes, include it. Just don't suggest it's another theory. I'm probably here where I'm going to go with this, but then here's this was our green arrow. So our corrective measure then must address the cause. All right, so at that point, for example, if you're doing the cognitive stress management techniques, you first of all, second column would show the depth, show you understanding of those techniques. I think we lost Sophie. But then you would be saying, well, I would do positive self-talk, and this is how I would do it, because that's how it's going to lower my arousal or make sure I'm in those optimal zones of arousal. So in this bit, there's almost like an action plan of how you're going to use that corrective measure. And that's a good thing, because it means you're then going to link it back to the initial cause. Hopefully that makes sense. I am a little bit conscious of time. Going back to Ed's question on this next slide, this is where I prompted, do you use the specification to plan your work? So now we know they're being assessed on depth, and as assessors, you know what you're going to look at with regards to depth. What your students signpost to you is really quite crucial. I don't know if signposting is the right word, but that's the one I tend to use with students. So I say to them, right, we're going to look through the specification. What could be your cause? And say, for example, I've got an example on the screen here. I've used this example because this is the one I see quite a lot of, because I tend to see a lot of games players, and because it's a defensive area assessment 2 weakness, a lot do talk about maybe lack of power, but we can't use lack of power because it's not on the spec. All right, the fitness components are GCSE, they're not on A level. So we might then get this part of the spec out, and then I might say to them, well, we don't want to put the title, the neuromuscular system, because if we do, we're signposting that everything on this bit of the specification needs to be included, because that's essentially how a moderator or an assessor will check. They'll check it against the spec. So what I might then say to them is, well, okay, we'll write neuromuscular system, but then we'll say with particular reference to characteristics and functions of muscle fibers and the recruitments of muscle fibers. So by signposting like that, doing that as a title, the arrows are then suggesting what should be included in order to get depth. Now, I guess I'm coming from 2 angles here. An angle to support your students so they know exactly what they're writing about and to stop them going off on a tangent, but also for you as an assessor, if you're trying to work out whether they've got excellent depth, you check against the spec as well. But what they write as that subheading is a really small thing, but can be quite influential in terms of signposting that depth and allowing you to mark that depth. I hope that makes sense. I've got another example here because this is the one that we most commonly see. You know, students do tend to talk about arousal theories. I guess they often make a lot of sense because that's what can cause the weakness to happen in the first place. But you can see a little bit of a difference on this bottom of the slide. If they were to put cause arousal, now what they're signposting at this point is everything within the spec under arousal. And if they miss some of that, you can't mark them for excellent depth. However, if they were to write 3.2.3.1.3 arousal with particular reference to the drive theory, they're signposting now that their depth is just drive theory. Sometimes with students, I can see them rocking at that point because they're a bit like, that doesn't seem quite enough, Jackie. And I think quite a few of your learners will feel like that. So what I then say to them was, well, why don't we go with arousal with particular reference to the theories of arousal? So then they give you depth on the theories and the zone of optimal functioning, but then they have to justify to you to the theory that they think is most relevant to what happened to their weakness. And that's good practice anyway, because remember that orange arrow, they should be directly linking back to the weakness. But what we find sometimes is they might round arousal and confidence, and you're like, that might now means they're going to have to tell me everything about arousal from the specification and everything for confidence. And they're not going to do that because that's hard. Whereas if they really pick from the specification early, they hopefully are quite clear on what they're including with regards to depth. And that's the same for the corrective measure. So I will sit with students normally. We won't have time to do this, but with teachers, sometimes I've given them an example of a weakness from different sports. So for those listening, this might be something you want to do as part of your department training. And then we almost sit and go through the spec and think, right, what would be the cause? What would be our partner corrective measure? And we're having that conversation about, well, how would we signpost that subheading to make sure that the student, you know, we're not setting the student up to fail. We're setting them up to succeed and make sure they do the accurate amount of depth for both the cause and corrective measure, because that's how they're being assessed. I know we haven't got time to do it, but anyone listening, it might be something that they do want to do with their department. If I go back to our non-negotiables, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record. But hopefully by doing it that way, it's made you kind of appreciate why these exist for the evaluation section, the bit out of 25. And you saw how I even provided a spec reference. I'm seeing that a lot now from learners over here, actually stating that reference, that many numbers, making that cause link back to the weakness, again, using a different color font or italics, so it jumps out to an assessor that they're making those links. Stating that corrective measure, same thing, direct from the spec, thinking about depth, making sure it addresses the cause. So that's your action plan. I maybe need to add that as a non-negotiable rather than just using it as that. Maybe saying, look, what is your action plan? If you're doing cognitive management techniques, how are you going to use it? If we use our muscle fiber guy, a lot then talk about weight training or plyometrics. I said, or then I don't think I would do both. I would just pick one. So it might be all the depth around plyometrics, but then it could be, well, this is what I would do and why. Now, going back to Ed's question for the types of training, I perhaps should have said it when he asked me. It's really good practice at that point to talk about the principles of training, because they're relevant to how you're going to address the cause, how you're going to make it specific, how you might ensure progressive overload, how you might make sure reversibility doesn't happen. That is just using the right language at that point. That's not then going on to another theory and then expecting depth, if that makes sense. Principles of training you would expect to be in an action plan anyway, if a learner has chosen to do types of training. That bottom bullet point is just, we do have some students going off spec, and we try to discourage it. It needs to be from the specification content, because that's how we assess depth. So I hope it was good seeing the non-negotiables, but in doing so, picking out some of the key things. I am conscious for Sophie and Ed, that was very much around structure, but I hope that I kept kind of mentioning some of the marking suggestions that link to that. Do you guys have any questions?
Not at the moment, no.
Do you have do you sort of encourage the kids to use a similar format for it, or do you let them kind of freestyle?
There isn't a template, if that's what you're asking, but I think if we use one of those, that checklist, they all kind of stick within the structure. So, you know, like the Word document I shared with you, that's the most common approach I'm seeing now. So it is a Word document or a Google Doc, but you've got your intro, your scenario, then you're straight into analysis, prep, execution, recovery, or whatever. And then once they get that prep, their first paragraph sorted, they then should model everything they do on that. With regards to structure, but also quantity. Might be a little bit of difference, but yeah, there's no template, but I tend to encourage what you saw then on the Word document.
Great, thank you.
Dan, I know that was probably a bit of a mind lock for you. I know the Edexcel is very different because I think they do a training program.
We did. I think we did AQA before, so I'm trying to think back. It's a few years since I taught this. We've been doing the BTEC. We're moving away from that next year, but this is really helpful. It brings back a few memories of what we did, so thank you. And
I think if you did do A-level before, AQA before, it was similar to what I've been saying today, but they had to do it 6 times. They had to do it for 6 weaknesses. My God, by weakness 2, they've just lost it. So I work with quite a few teachers that are still in that old spec regime, and it's trying to say to them, no, we're really honing down now on just one, and being a bit more detailed about that one. So it shouldn't be this monster piece of work, because actually it should be quite a concise piece of work because they've got so much going on with their practical and their exam as well. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into it if you do choose to do it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Jackie, is there being concise, is there word limits or guidelines for particular sections or the total piece of work?
No, there isn't. It isn't one that existed. I think I get asked that a lot, but they don't want to put one out there because the depth element, you know, someone could pick arousal drive theory and still get a really good mark because they've signposted that they're just going to do depth about drive, whereas someone might say arousal theories and write a lot more, but that shouldn't. Right. There shouldn't be a difference in mark there if they've both accessed depth. So they don't tend to put a word limit out there. Sorry.
One of those students is working a bit smarter rather than harder, though.
Yeah, and I do work with some teachers where certainly for maybe their CD borderline students, it just starts to make things a little bit more manageable, knowing that they can still access depth, even though they might not be writing much more, you know, writing as much as maybe their peer who's working towards an A. Did that help you both in terms of marking? I'm conscious I didn't work through a marked example.
100%. I mean, yeah, Sophie, what do you think?
I think it's giving us a start point, and now we know kind of, I think Ed and I will sit down and we can use this as quite a nice base. And I think are we able to access your checklist and the and those grids that you showed us?
100%.
That'd be really useful.
Yeah, I'll as well. I've just thought on as well on the rugby league one. I've got a golf one. Now I know the golf one's been around a long time. It's a level 5 example, but the one I'm sending is one that's been marked, so you guys can see the kind of comments that have been written, and he has also marked it on the best fit using a red and green colour. So red for one of the area assessments and green for the other. So I'll get that across to Ed as well.
Perfect. Yeah. I think the non-negotiables were great. Simple, like you tell the kids, this is just an absolute must. You know, there's no grey areas there. And I think that will really help them, guide them in what they're writing. So yeah, like that.
The teacher that suggested that, I am still working with him in his school, and he does like to remind me that he made that suggestion and how I should be giving him some royalties, because I didn't think of it myself, but as he said it at the end of the day, I was like, what a fab idea. And I've used them ever since. And we built that list together. Yeah, so he likes to remind me that was his idea. Yeah, so hopefully that's been it was a bit of a snapshot, but.
Brilliant.
Beneficial.
Thank you very much, Jackie. So yeah, guys, have you got any other questions at all before Jackie leaves us? No. So yeah, thank you. like I say, Jackie, we'll post this on our DXBP YouTube channel. So, I mean, I'm going to want to watch it back and re-listen. I was just trying to absorb. I've been writing down like timestamps so I can go back and watch it again. So thank you very much. We've got next Thursday as well. Remind me, what's the title of that session?
So we're going to look at effective AO3 in the short answer questions and then the 8 marker, and then that'll build nicely into session 3, which is focusing mainly on the 15 mark questions.
Lovely, yeah, and the synoptic as well. We said we were going to try and merge it, weren't we?
Put that into session 3.
And then, yeah, guys, if Ellie and I know like Sophie and I are going to want to have more discussions on marking, so you know, if you want to work together on that or get back in touch with Jackie,
that'd be great.
Do you, as I don't have, my geography is really bad, so I don't know how close you guys are, but do you do any kind of mock cross standardization in terms of the coursework? No, it'd be internal standardization. So like in our department, there's like 3 of us marking, and then we'll standardize between us. But no, it's we are all down the road from each other pretty much. Yeah. So we could do that. And Dan,
I mean, it would be great. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go on, Ellie.
When I worked in Singapore before, we used to have a group. We used to have a. Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, right. Sorry. When I was in Singapore, there was a group of teachers just brought out the HL stuff. So teachers across different schools, we just had like a sort of like a, not a WhatsApp group because there's 4 million of those in the world, but it was like just an email list where if anyone had a question about, you know, sort of what's what and how do we do this, so we just sort of contact each other just for a bit of reassurance there. Not, you know, not sort of officially standardized, but it was just really useful tool to pick someone else's brain about something.
Yeah, I plan to use everyone that signed up for there was like 20 people that signed up for these sessions with Jackie. Although they're not here all tonight, but I plan to use that email list as a bit of a collaboration list. So Dan, if you want to know which people on there do Edexcel, I can share that with you. I do know that most over here do AQA at A level and Edexcel at GCSE. And Jackie doesn't know why, but it just tends to be the done thing over here. So yeah, that AQA support network is a little bit larger in your local community, I suppose.
Cheers, Ed.
Yeah.
I think it might be worth saying, because it's still recording, that obviously my email address now is on that. So if people do watch the recording back and they've got questions, I'd just prefer them to email me if that helps. I don't mind. I know that everyone has an NEA advisor, but I don't mind them pinging a question over via email. If there's anything that they want me to kind of clarify from the recording. But what Ellie said as well, I think that's why I asked, and I appreciate workload's huge, but I do know what's happening regionally here is some schools are just kind of coming together to either have that conversation or just to look at a couple of pieces, just to help them with the confidence. They're all using the best fit marking grid, and just closer to the moderation, just doing a little bit of cross standardization that way as well. And I know that comes with additional time, but I'm hearing good things that are coming out as a result, because like you say, Ellie, it's opening up that conversation with each other around it.
Yeah, great.
I'll try and sort it. I'll look at it. But that's it, Jackie, I think, yeah.
Cool. I'll stop recording. Are you wanting to stay on and talk about the coach? Or I can see your lights have gone off.
Yeah. Feel free to stop recording.
Okay.